You're listening to Eyes on the Ground. I'm Slade Ham, comedian, writer, explorer. I'll be your host. In this episode, I'll talk with mathematician turned comedian Matthew Broussard. His credits are many, from MTV and the late night circuit to various sitcom appearances and a constant slot in Comedy Central's stable. He's also frustratingly good looking. I'd argue that his real success is not the product of luck or looks, but of diligently working out how comedy works. I believe that a huge part of what makes comedy work is spontaneity, and we'll certainly get to that. But with stand-up specifically, there's a very technical element. Joke form, structure, and detail are all vital. And stand-up is so much more than just getting up on stage and saying funny things. As an audience member, it can be fascinating to see what goes into the sausage. But as a comedian, there are things that we tend to gloss over in our green room conversations for fear of sounding like we put more into things than we actually do. I would encourage the opposite. I find that I have a deeper connection with my peers who I know understand the underlying structure to our medium. I begin with Matthew Broussard by discussing the structure that exists not in our writing, but in the performance.
I've been helped a great deal by my acting coach. I know that's a cringeworthy thing to say as a comedian, but he taught me that acting is way less of an art form and way more of a craft, in that the goal is to understand the script really, really well. When you're given a script, it's your job to read it 20 times before you can understand every word, every detail, all of the information, not the emotion. Every actors, I think a mistake is that you think it's about emotion. It's about delivering information, right? That's the thing. There are things that happen in a scene. There are things that have to happen, whether they be a glance or a turn, right, or an emphasis of a word that drive the story forward. And you have to know those and hit those perfectly and the way the writer intended, and then find everything else in between that is optional and change it as much as you want to, or as much as you need to make it natural, but know where the hard beats are. As a stand-up comedian, you are gifted with knowing every beat better than anyone possibly could, because you wrote it. You know which parts are necessary to drive the joke, to drive the laugh, and change what you're allowed to change, which is more than you think every time, because if it's new to you, it's definitely new to them, and that's your goal, to seem genuine. That's what I've learned in more recent time.
It's so fascinating, because I've tried to make this. I don't act, so I only have certain. You do. That's the thing. I know you as a comedian, you do. Yeah. As a comedian, you absolutely do. You just know the script really well. That's very fair. Those muscles, those sorts of recreating a situation. I know the stuff that has, just like you just said, and sort of as you were talking about, I'm like, no, that's exactly what I'm doing. It's as I'm making down. These are the three things that make this joke work. Everything else is really pliable.
Right.
You can change the characters, you can change the setting, you can change, but really a joke is just two or three little components, I guess.
Right. And you can even change where a prepositional clause falls at the beginning or in the middle of a sentence. That's a very optional thing, and to hear it differently, it can really drive your performance.
How much playing around on paper do you do with the bit? What is your writing process, or do you just sort of take an idea to the stage? Because as we sit here and talk about it, and I know we've talked about it in the past, the nuance and the word choice and all these little bitty details. And I'm trying to go through my own process and see where I can streamline it. I write a lot of stuff physically. Me with a pen and paper. It doesn't really happen on a computer. And I'm constantly going through and moving those things from one section to the next. All right, let's do the new version of it. Do you write that way, or do you sort of just take these loose ideas in your head to the stage? How much of a complete thought goes to the stage with you?
I write down the punchlines. If I have a premise and I can think of a couple punchlines, I basically just write down the wording of the punchlines, which I know pretty well, of how it has to be worded, I think. To get a laugh, I write a couple, I'll put parentheses of what word works best here. There's a couple options. I want to try all three. So I'll put parentheses and slashes between the optional parts. But it'll ultimately just be one sentence I write down. And then the setup, I typically don't write down. Mostly I have laziness. And then also because the setup is the part I can let be natural. So when I go on stage, I'll probably say it long. I'll definitely say it long the first time. And then every time after that, I'll see what information I can strip away, or what words I can strip away. And you can always take away way more. The crowd's actually really smart at putting stuff together in that setup portion. It's you pare it down as much as you can. And then the punchlines, I have those written and I know how they're supposed to go. And I somewhat improvise the setup.
Got you. That's I find those with setups specifically, it's the more I get married to a setup, the more stuck in my set that bit gets. If I have, sometimes I'll have a piece of, a piece that's got a good punchline and a good middle chunk in the beginning, really could be anything. It doesn't matter if this is a situation that happened, while I was around my family in a house. It doesn't matter if I was with some friends in a so-and-so. Right. And those kinds of bits, I don't like to stick them anywhere in particular. They just tend to live where I have them at the moment, I guess. And that's sort of the fun part. Josh Sneed was just telling me, he goes, he changes the first name of the person in his story every time he tells it, which is
that's so cool. I have the opposite thing where I like to make all of my stories start with, so I was in Dallas. All of my jokes to be in Dallas. That's just so funny to me.
Is there, you mentioned earlier that you like to make, maybe I'm paraphrasing here, but that you like a little unique, there's something to a show that you like to be a little unique, that you need to feel that connection with them. What is the difference between a show where you just go, where you're going through the motions, and then a show where you really feel like you connected? What is the difference between the two?
I rarely achieve that. I feel like so much of the time I'm just doing a word for word recreation of the setup done so many times. But if I can address something up top that is completely unique to that room, I want a joke that will never work again. That's the dream, because of who I'm just following and who's in the audience and all of that. If I can connect three things that are all seemingly so random that it probably won't happen again, then I feel pretty good. There's very easy crowd work where you're like, well, there's always going to be this guy in the audience, so I can always make that joke, or this host I'm used to following, so I always have a joke about him. If I can have the real ones, it feels good. And then everything else will typically have a good energy after that.
There's something to, if you're going to do crowd work or whatever, it's finding the little piece of the crowd to play with is one thing. Finding a way to combine pieces of a crowd where I've got this thing happening over here and this thing happening over here, sort of jamming those two things together in a weird live way always makes a show. Those are the ones I walk away with. I'm like, man, I feel like I did something there. I created a thing. We played it.
It's not even that hard to come up with, but if you're free in your mind, if you're constricted to other thoughts, you will not see it.
Right.
You have to free yourself. Because we're like, as comedians, we're definitely clever enough to tie things together in a way that will impress people. If you give us a minute and three objects.
I like watching the wheels turn on stage. It was we were in Europe together. You came out and did the Mediterranean on an Armed Forces Entertainment tour. I forget who it was Laura Hayden, Sam Damaris. I can't remember who else was on that tour. Maybe Brendan McKeegan.
McKeegan.
Okay, that was our group. And we played a game where before the show we would all write down, and this is stuff I love because you have to be, it kicks that autopilot switch off that we're so frequent to flip. But we had all written down a phrase and we threw them in a bucket, and right before our sets we would all grab, like, okay, I've got to work in that ain't my blowfish into the set, whatever these random things are.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. That ain't my blowfish. I can't remember what the rest of them were, but those sorts of exercises to me are so fun because they take me completely out of all right, I guess I'm just going to go up there and do these jokes. I've got to be aware and awake, and I've got to stay sentences ahead of myself to figure out where this bit's going to go, because that was the one thing I wouldn't do with the game, was allow myself to figure it out ahead of time. I was like, I don't want to plant this. Then I'm just going up and doing a line, and that's not fun.
Yeah. This was planned before I went on stage, but it was I was in Halifax, and I was doing a little festival, and I had two openers, a girl named Jordan and a guy named Jordan. And I went on stage, give it up for your hosts, Jordan and Jordan. I think they misunderstand my contract when I asked for a pair of Jordans in the green room.
Strong.
Very proud of that one.
Stand-up is not the same industry it was when I began. It's saturated. There's so many more comedians. And when you, as a supplier, no longer have the advantage, you have to find different ways to make yourself stand out. Many times the obvious solution is to find a point of view that no one else is doing. And it's on us to look at our sets and figure out where we're letting ourselves off easy. Is a tender joke really original? We know when we're making an observation that tons of other comics have made. It's up to us to go 1, 2, or even 3 steps past that if we want to make something that no one's made before. Where do you mine for material? Like, what is the Matthew Broussard process? Because your comedy is smarter than most. You're not just doing some of the simple premises that we see rehashed all the time. What constitutes a subject for you? Where do you go, I want to put my teeth in this?
I don't know. If I had a process, I think I'd have a lot more material, but I want there to be something new or a challenge in every joke of some kind. I like a small bit of a challenge for myself. I don't always accomplish that, but like, what's new about this, or what makes this kind of a harder position to defend, or what makes this like a harder thing to talk about? Typically, showing some kind of vulnerability is usually moments where I feel pretty vulnerable or insecure. I try to remind myself of like, if you dig into this specific thing, you can find a universal emotion underlying it. And because I look like this, typically people tend to really enjoy seeing me fail. So that's a guiding principle. And I also like, so it's either that, or I either like for the joke to kind of deliver some information, some kind of new, what I would find interesting information, because if you can interest people in a topic, then the punchlines tend to hit harder. They're distracted by learning.
Yeah.
And
your Conan set is a spectacular example.
Yeah. If you tell a bunch of one-liners in a row, the crowd is now braced for one-liners, but if you distract them with educational kind of content, they let their guard down. The same way with stories. Stories aren't necessarily as funny. A good comedic story doesn't have these amazing punchlines, but you're so interested in the character and the plot that you don't need as hard of punchlines to get huge reactions. Is that
a I mean, I guess that's really it at its essence, regardless of the style you're working in or whatever. It's just, look at this hand over here until I can hit you with this one.
Right.
And you just sometimes you distract them with education.
I think, that's kind of my goal. I think all we're doing is distracting. I think everything between the punchlines is just a distraction to get to the punchlines. Is how I look at comedy.
Completely.
Some people are way more meat.
You mentioned the specificity of a bit, like when you go in, especially when I see open micers, and I know myself when I started, the tendency was to write generalized material. I got to write stuff that everybody's going to get. And as you grow and you progress, you realize that definitively, at least for me anyway, the more specific I write about myself and then trust the audience to find themselves in it instead of trying to cast this broad net and hope I catch everything. It's really, to me anyway, the more specific I talk, the more they seem to find themselves and get it. Do you get that even when you do? I mean, some of your stuff is heavier or smarter. Yeah, go ahead.
I know. I was answering yes to your question. Yeah,
fair.
The more specific, but the other side of that though is I watch this with new comics. Watch this with my girlfriend, where if it's too new to them and too specific to your experience, you then waste a lot of time trying to create that context. What you're trying to create is a context between you and the audience of information, and you have to do so while getting a laugh every 12 seconds.
Right.
If you sputter out and spend 20 seconds explaining to someone, you ruin your next punchline. Every second you go without a punchline, you diminish the pop of the next one you tell. So then it becomes, you have to be really strong at editing or find ways to intersperse quick jokes to prop up the structure of all that information you're delivering. Right.
Because ultimately, they need to understand the scenario, but only to the degree they need it to get the punchline.
To the bare minimal degree. So it's having enough, but not having too much. It's a razor thin margin. That's another thing, is also don't have gaps between events and stories. A good thing with stand-up, and I've learned at watching good stand-ups, is they'll say this happened and then immediately this happened, when in actuality it was 2 days.
There's no need.
You get home, she's already there. It doesn't have to be like a week later.
There's so much crossover as I've started playing with filmmaking and just playing with camera angles and mixing and editing and things like that. You start to notice, you're like, oh, okay, this is why TV does this. This is why, conversations pick up in the middle of the conversation. This is why you join these people in the car and you don't have the whole process of walking out and stand-up is the same way with the bit, is just eliminating all of that unnecessary.
It's information. This is why I think you talk about, people ask me, how does being a mathematician connect to writing stand-up? It's when you start viewing your job as delivering information. It's like lines of code. You're not going to have an extra line of code that does nothing. If you're coding a computer function, every line has a purpose.
Chekhov's gun.
No redundancies, nothing extraneous. Every line has a reason for being there. And good stand-up, when you look at it word by word, nothing is extraneous. If you remove one thing, it would all fall apart. If you added anything, it would be fat. That's your goal as a writer. And I think it's way less artistic than people think. And that makes it, to me, more fun.
That's what, once I figured out that there were patterns and there were formulas and that this thing had an underlying structure to it. And how you choose to decorate that becomes your own. But the walls and the foundation and the way jokes work, it's not really as magical as people think, that we're just up there being hilarious human beings. And that's it. You're right. It became so much more interesting to me.
Yes. There are like 9 joke devices. Onion did it. There's like 9 jokes. Right. That's really it. And it's really true. And you can obviously, the fun is when you find things that begin to subvert that or break those rules just a little bit. But
like, can you give an example of that?
There's a Dimitri Martin joke that I can't really figure out. It's so good that it kills me. He says, I was at the grocery store. I was leaving. I was walking to my car, and this guy recognized me. He goes, "Hey, you're Dimitri Martin." He goes, "Yeah. And he goes, "Wow, can I be in one of your jokes?" And I said, "Sure." How about this one? And like that one, just I love that.
That's
one so
frustrating. Yeah, where does that fall? Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a paradox.
I think it's paradox, and paradox is one of the best joke structures there is.
Do you utilize it a lot, or do you?
Not much. That's like, to me, one of the of whatever 9 or 10. That's like, to me, when you pull off paradox really well, or paradox or recursion. I guess recursion is a type of paradox. It's super duper neat. Can you hand me him? You want to meet my new friend?
Oh yeah. What do you have? You got a cat.
We got a cat. Yeah. His name is Password. Please tell me you get it.
Yes, I get it. Yes, I get it. Yes, okay. I get it. Your password is your cat's name. And yes, I see what you did there.
Thank you.
That's frustratingly clever.
I guess would be the comedic principle.
Is that on the lower end of the difficulty spectrum? Do you have them all ranked?
They don't rank linear, but one thing I've learned is that the harder of a joke it is, the more it can fail and the more it can succeed. A pun is rarely middle ground. Either a pun is ugh or wow. Well, and maybe on a person by person basis. I think hyperbole and specificity. Those are ones where there's comedians who make most of their punchlines are just light hyperbole or just specificity and the details and the imagery of it. And those can't really blow up in your face. Right. They also can't get a roaring applause break as often.
Right? These are the sorts of things I couldn't even conceptualize when I began. They're also the exact things that can separate you. Think of it in other terms. The home baker versus the one who actually understands the chemistry behind the yeast and the temperature and the eggs. One who stirs everything up in a bowl at once, or the one who knows what baking powder actually does and whether or not to use it in the first place. This isn't necessary to do stand-up, of course, nor do you need complete understanding for any endeavor. But the difference between the hobbyist and the professional is precisely that. The science behind the art. So you also do Monday Pun Day, which is yes. You're still doing, I assume. Monday Pun Day.
No, I took a break, but I'm restarting Monday. I just took like a month off.
Oh, well then we played I've got one. I've got my own very specific personal Monday Pun Day that you did of Slade ham while we were on that European tour.
Yes. What Dick was like slain ham, like right. Your old English conjugation.
Whose name's Slain? It's a fun game. If you go to Monday Pun Day, you do visual representations of puns. For instance, Slade ham you did as a giant ham with a dragon slayer sort of sticking a sword in it. And
Slade ham.
Yeah, Slade ham. Those games, is that because you do that and you do sculpture also? You just had hold one of your little what do you? I want to call them.
He's not done yet. Please don't judge him.
You work on, please don't judge my perfect sculpture.
Face isn't done yet. He'll have a lot more character in his face. The eye is the most important part.
You do these things and you operate outside of stand-up comedy artistically. Nobody's paying you to make little sculptures, and no one pays you for Monday Punday. Maybe there's some ad revenue or whatever else, but there's sort of passion projects, I guess. And the thing I see recurring amongst all the people I really respect artistically is that they don't all just play in the same pool. That creatively outside of stand-up, you still have stuff you have to get out of your head in different genres. Yeah. What is the pull there? Why are you making Pokemon sculptures?
It's way less artistic creative thing. It's more just a disdain for authority. Like if there's something I have to do, I can't do it. Like I started doing stand-up because I had a job. Like stand-up wasn't a thing I had to do, it was a thing I got to do. So I was working way harder at stand-up when I had a job. And now that I'm at stand-up living, I don't sit down and write nearly as much. And that's when I started getting really into Monday Punday, because like stand-up, I have to write material for crowds or whatever. I was like, no, Monday Punday is more fun because no one pays me for it.
Right.
And then that has become more of an established thing. And now sculptures, I'm like, no one will ever pay me to do this. I don't ever want this to be a job. I just want this to be something for me. I don't ever want to have to be beholden to anyone. The second I feel I owe someone something, I just can't find the energy to do it.
I understand that. Art is fun when you don't have to do it. Even putting myself on a schedule of any sort, it takes the fun. I don't say it takes the fun out of it, but doing something when I want to do something versus doing something specifically when I have to do it because I have to do it. It's I like being funny. I don't necessarily always like being funny at 8:00 every Friday. That part can be a little bit taxing. I can give you the
ultimate example though of that. In college finals, finals like 2 or 3 weeks, and a lot of it was projects, and it was computational math. So a lot of it was coding projects. And during this time, my freshman year, I made an origami sphere like this big out of like hundreds of modules individually folded. But one year I got distracted and made a Sudoku solver in Matlab, where it would logically break down Sudokus. You'd enter a Sudoku and it could solve it using not a randomized method, an actual
brute force,
the way your brain would solve it. Not brute force, brute force, because there's definitely brute force solvers, and I don't have the power to do that. It would actually look at it and solve it analytically.
Wow!
And I probably all of my courses suffered. I spent hours on that thing. No one saw it besides me. That was the most. I was so passionate about it.
But that's I think the greatest part about it. I mean, it's as long as I have outlets, and it's I gravitate towards the ones that aren't mandatory. I just do. Mm-hmm. It is. I would rather write in a notebook or a journal or scribble stuff that no one will ever see, rather than something for publish. That's just. Yeah. I just don't do that. If you told me we're not going to publish it, I'll be all over it. I have to be tricked.
Yeah, we're similar in that regard. I wonder if that's true among comedians, because there is such a rebellious streak. It's maybe a bit of an antiquated trope, but.
Maybe it is, and I can't speak for all of them, but I mean, my entire stand-up comedy for me, the reason I do this for a living is because 20-year-old me did not want a job. This is all that result. I feel everything about that last segment. It's a large part of what I try to concentrate on, keeping myself engaged in the things that I now have to do. Of course, there are things that I began because I love them. My newsletter, my travel logs, the next book. And I still love them. It's the self-imposed schedule that bothers me. Of course, I could change that at any time, but I know I need the structure to actually produce. I have to be a good boss and a good employee. So rather than edit the responsibilities I've given myself, I reframe them. Believe it or not, I hang on to a very old memory to do it. There was a period in my life right after I got fired from my radio job, which would have made me 21 or so at the time. I was miserably broke. I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life, and I was out of options. I took a job through a temp agency and showed up bright and early, 6 a.m., to the address they gave me. And the address was in a field in southeast Texas, out off a dusty back road near Hampshire Fannett. The job was loading 60-pound bags of plastic polymer onto pallets, which would then be collected by an angry Vietnamese man on a forklift And this was in August when the Texas sun would frequently clear 100 degrees, just humidity in the oceanic range. My coworker was mentally challenged, which I bring up only to give context to the complete lack of mental challenge to the job. I sweated next to him until 10 a.m. loading these sacks. And when I took my lunch break, I never came back. And it was disrespectful, especially considering that I had the gall to ask for my check for those 4 hours. But the bigger point is I use that to offset every lamentation I make about the comfortable workload I've assigned myself in current times. It's good to keep a point of reference like that in your backpack, in a pocket that allows easy retrieval. Now back to Matthew, as we discuss a shared experience and how we both handled it. When we were in Europe, and I believe it was the Italy leg, your father passed away.
Yes.
And I didn't know it for 2 days, I think.
I didn't tell anyone. Yeah.
I'm asking because in 2007, I lost my father, and I was en route to a gig in Washington, D.C., and he had gone in for heart surgery. I talked to him at, 10 or 11 in the morning on the phone, and got on the plane, flew to D.C., got off the plane, and my brother called me at like 5 in the afternoon to tell me that my dad was in a coma. And this was routine surgery. And I remember the entire scenario, how everything slowed down. I remember going in my room and I was like, I've got to go be funny in 2 hours. I've got to go out here. And it was Christmas season. So it's just chock full of Christmas parties and happy couples and big groups and I was so angry and mad at all of these people while I stood off stage going, how am I going to go talk? I hate everyone in this room and I'm feeling all this emotion. And then I went on stage and I remember I was up there for over an hour and a half. It was the safest place I think I could have been. I was distracted from all of the nonsense. I didn't tell the crowd. I just did the show, did a shot, said goodnight, walked off, and then everything sort of came back in. I never saw that with you. You sort of kept your head down and just plugged away and your shows didn't suffer. How do you compartmentalize that?
I think I had a very similar experience to you. The cat's climbing me, sorry. I didn't want to tell you guys because I felt it was a complicated thing for me because my dad had Parkinson's for 15 years and we were supposed to say goodbye to him. This was December. In March, we kind of had a chance to say goodbye. I was there. My brother was there. My mom was obviously there, and his brothers happened to be in town. So the whole family was there, and he had an infection. And the way Parkinson's works is you eventually get an infection that leads to pneumonia and leads to death, whether it's from UTIs or like a staph infection. And one of the days, the body isn't strong enough to beat it, and the antibiotics can only do so much. And a lot of times you choose to, when one of these infections happens, to not finish the course and let it take its toll, because every day you're a little bit worse on Parkinson's. And we had the chance, and we didn't. That sounds so horrible, but we didn't do it then because some of us had very mixed feelings about that. We ultimately decided to let him, keep him around, knowing that it was just going to be the exact same thing in a few months. And December rolls around, and I was frustrated in a way. I kind of wanted it to be over. It felt like my dad was already gone. And this was just a formalized goodbye rather than a de facto one that we had faced long ago. And I made the call. It was that night before, and going to sleep, got a call, I was talking to my brother and my mom, and they were like, "You're the last vote. What's your decision?" And I said firmly, "No antibiotics." And I went to sleep and I slept very weird, and I woke up and I had a voicemail. I knew what it was, and it felt very different it feels very different in retrospect, it feels like, oh, I wish I could take it back. You're so sure hanging up the phone. And when it's actually, he's not out there in the world, you're like, can I take it back? And I didn't, very selfishly and very immaturely, I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go home because it meant we were in Italy or Spain. It would probably be a 5-hour drive, if not more, to an airport. Then we'd get on a plane and hopefully a direct flight, but maybe not. Of how many hours? 12?
Yeah, it was at least 8 or 10.
Switch time zones. Wasn't going to sleep on that flight. Wasn't going to sleep that night. And by the time I got to Atlanta, my body would have been so jacked up. It would have been probably 48 hours with maybe 5 hours of decent sleep, and already being an emotional mess. And like I said, I had said my goodbye. So I didn't want to drag anyone down with that. And I didn't want you guys to think I was like some sociopath for not going home. And I knew the happiest I could be in that moment, the best way to get over it was to continue to tour. Because it was like, that tour meant a lot to me, and it would have been another loss. I mean, if you view me as selfish for all this behavior, I do as well. But yeah, I were you guys like, you can go home? And I was like, that's the last thing I want to do. So I remember the next night, you were there. I think it was when we were in that theater. I had a B- set, maybe a B. Nothing particularly good, nothing particularly bad. I didn't do any special material about him, but it felt really good to do stand-up. One thing I'm in control of in this world is the better I get at it, the more I have this ability to make strangers laugh. And
I think
it helped. And I remember we were at the airport. I can't even remember the joke. I wish for my life I could remember the joke. We were standing around. You guys figured out because of Facebook that he had passed away, and y'all being really nice, really considerate. And Sam, after a couple hours, we're talking, and he says something. It's a mean joke, mean at the expense of me and my dad. And he paused and he looked at me just terrified. He had said something wrong, and I stared at him and I just guffawed. It was so cathartic. It was like, this is going to be okay. I'm going to move on. He made me feel so much better. It didn't, because the tendency when someone dies is to kind of, treat them so delicately that it feels insincere. That's not how we treat each other. Not how comics on a military tour treat each other. We bust balls and make up lyrics to songs.
I think there's something to the control factor that you mentioned. And as I sort of replay, that one night in DC for myself, it really was, those 2 to 3 hours prior to the show had been so just mentally and emotionally chaotic. I didn't even know how to put a bridle on that horse. It was just jumping and up until I walked on stage, through the features act, through everything, until I got up there. And as soon as I got up there, that you get that first sort, like anything, you get that first sort of response. And then it was quickly, okay, this dude can get through this. This dude is in charge of stuff. Matthew beat me in a contest in 2012. Contests are like television sets in that they require specialization in preparation. It's far different than a club set. For me, as a long-form storyteller, and I know it's limiting to even vocalize this, but I rarely do well. And I know it's because I specifically refuse to work on it. So how does Matthew prepare?
I still love the preparation process, because my goal is, if it's a 5-minute set, I want that 5 minutes to be 5 minutes I could expand into 10. I want it to be 10 minutes worth of material, but cutting any B tags, any unnecessary bridges, any unnecessary words. So that's a really fun chance in editing. And sometimes you do that, and that other 5 never comes back. And that's how you get great comedy. That's how you get a good late night set. I do lose something in that process. The last time I did a contest, I remember there was someone I watched too advanced, and I did not. She just had this electric set that it didn't feel like beats. It didn't feel like stepping through it. I'm sure it is on some level, but it seemed so much more organic than what I was doing that it like haunts me still. I don't know what she did to get that level of charisma and seeming spontaneity, even if it wasn't.
Right.
Where I was just like, you could, this is a set that you could caption it very easily. That's all I can offer, which is, when you're doing TV, that's also a good thing. Now if I'm ever recording a set, you can also be like, I'm trying to picture the subtitles underneath me as I'm talking.
What's the advice for the guy on the ground working his ass off right now?
For me, it was always reps, number one. Just the amount of time you can spend on set. That's what Chase said to me. He said, who do you think is going to win this contest for Houston's Funniest Person? He goes, I'll tell you who's going to win. It's who does the most sets between now and the finals. And I was like, okay, done. Look for something in every joke that challenges you, that challenges the form. If a joke looks like, if you see a thing like, I can make that funny, that's not necessarily a joke to pursue. If you look at that, like, that's really funny to me, but I don't know how I'll make that work. It's going to take longer, but when it works, it's going to be a more impressive joke. And then another thing I would say is When people say edgy, there are more edges than just people's sensibilities. There's so many edges. There's the educational edge of how educational can I make this before it becomes boring.
Before they check out.
Walk up to that line and step on it firmly. How personal, how so many, or there's a new edge that I can't think of in this moment that you can push. How weird, all of those things. Edgy is not just, can you say the most coarse words?
Remember what he said back at the beginning?
As a stand-up comedian, you are gifted with knowing every beat better than anyone possibly could.
I think people forget that when they talk about stand-up comedy. There's this misfounded belief that we just go up on stage and start winging it. That's all stage fright is, lack of confidence in the material. If I asked you to describe to a group of strangers how to do your particular job, or to expound upon, say, your daughter's creative personality, you wouldn't hesitate. You know the material. And it's the same way with stand-up or any other medium. Once you've learned the basics intimately, to the point where they're automatic, your brain can start to play with ways to make it fresher. It's the difference between the guitarist who can hold an entire conversation while he's soloing, and me, who can't even play back-to-back G chords if you interrupt me. Creation is not effortless, even when it appears to be. There's more to what we do than we're often willing to admit, because once we acknowledge it, we have to act on it. You can follow Matthew Broussard on social media at Monday Punday, or additionally on his Instagram page for his sculpture at Cockblock Gargoyles. Eyes on the Ground is produced by me, Slade. Additional production and music provided by Brian Carrion. To support future projects like this, please consider contributing to my Patreon or subscribing to me on all things social media at Slade Ham, SladeHam.